Olio is an app that exists in the sort of climate tech or circular economy space. Food safety trained volunteers. We call them food waste heroes. These are wonderful individuals and human beings. Almost 10 million people that joined Olio, roughly half of them are outside of the UK and half of them are within the UK. The real challenge is managing a community of volunteers at scale.
Everyone, welcome to Startup and Scaleup People podcast, a place where you can learn about how people build businesses, their lives, and hear their stories. I'm Mario Rivas, and I'm here today with Tessa Clarke. She's the founder and CEO of Olio. This business has been running for a few years already, around 9, with more than around 9 million users already, and a very impactful, obviously, value proposition. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, right? I saw you last year, I think at Sifted, when you were you were in a panel talking about, different stuff about your business. I think it would be good if you can explain what Olio does and what you resolve.
So Olio is an app that exists in the sort of climate tech or circular economy space, and the problem that we want to solve is the enormous problem of waste in our homes and local communities, specifically food waste. That's our real USP. And how the app works is anyone can snap a photo of their spare food or household items. They add it to Olio. People living nearby get an alert. They can browse the listings, request what they want, and pop round and pick it up. So everything on Olio is hyperlocal, it's neighbour to neighbour. It's about giving away rather than throwing away your spare food and household items. So typical use cases might be on the food side of things. Perhaps you have overcatered for a party. Perhaps you're going away for a weekend or going away on holiday and you've got food that you're not going to eat. Perhaps you're going on a diet, or the food item that was your toddler's favourite item last week, they hate this week, unwanted food gifts, etc. So they're classic examples of why people have surplus food. And then the household items that people tend to give away on Olio include clothes, books, toys, toiletries, opened products, absolutely. So, for example, if you've bought a shampoo and used it a couple of times, it didn't really work for your hair, absolutely you can give that away via the Olio app. So it's stuff that has a valuable second life, but you're not going to sell, you're not going to ship halfway across the country. And then the major source of supply coming onto the platform is via our 1,000 food safety trained volunteers. We call them food waste heroes. And what they do is once they're trained up, they can claim a collection slot, which is an opportunity to go to a local business. So, for example, their local supermarket, or perhaps their local school or office canteen, hospital canteen, TV or film production shoot. And on your allotted time and day, you will leave your house, you'll go to that business location, you will pick up all of their unsold or unserved food, you will take it back to your home, you will add it to Olio, and then within minutes, your neighbours are requesting it, and minutes later, they're popping round to your house to pick it up. And that takes that food from being considered a waste stream in the business location to roughly within 1 to 2 hours later being fully redistributed into multiple homes in the local community.
Wow. And are these real volunteers or do you give them, I don't know, an incentive to join the community?
So the volunteers are recruited from our existing community of users. So when you join the Olio app, you'll see lots of adverts and calls to action encouraging you to become a volunteer to rescue food from a business near you. And those volunteers are motivated by a combination of intrinsic factors and extrinsic factors. So the intrinsic factors is it feels really amazing to rescue perfectly good food and to give it away to members of your local community, in particular during a cost of living crisis. So it just feels incredible to save that food. It's something that you get to do from the convenience of your own home. You are making a really big difference in your local community. So people build, honestly, lifelong friendships through their volunteering. So there's lots of, sort of intrinsic motivation. Then the extrinsic motivation piece is we do allow our volunteers to keep up to 10% of what they collect if they would like as a thank you. And for some of our food waste heroes, that's a really important part of the volunteering opportunity. For others, they don't keep any of the food themselves because They don't want any more pret-a-manger sandwiches or baguettes from Tesco.
Oh, wow. 100,000, volunteers. That's a very massive community.
Yeah.
And is this running just in the UK, or it's like a group? Because, like the world wastes is over 1 billion tons of food every year, right? It's a massive problem. Are you running the UK, or also you expanded the business to other countries?
So we as a team are really at the moment focused on the UK, but I should say of the almost 10 million people that have joined Olio, roughly half of them are outside of the UK and half of them are within the UK. And we have had items successfully shared in over 60 countries so far. And so that's happening very organically. It's about someone who's passionate about Olio and their local community. They get their neighbours on the app and then they start sharing their spare food and household items. But the volunteering program right now is mainly focused in the UK. We've got some pilots underway in a couple of international markets with large grocery retailers in those markets. So we are now starting to focus on international expansion.
Which are the main markets right now that you are targeting?
So our largest community is actually in Singapore. So we've got about 200,000 Olioers in Singapore. We've got conversations underway in the Middle East right now. And we also have very active communities in Latin America. So Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Argentina.
I'm from Chile, so I'm excited to hear that you're going to expand there too. And when I was obviously doing some research about, and Olio has redistributed more than 140 million meals, which was the hardest operational leap between 1 million meals to 100 million meals, which was the big challenge.
The real challenge is managing a community of volunteers at scale. These are wonderful individuals and human beings, but there's lots of challenging aspects to the role. And so we have to invest very, very heavily in the systems and processes and policies and procedures that are required to make sure that all of those volunteers are doing what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. And then you've got the challenge of human beings interacting with other human beings, which inevitably, despite the best intentions of everybody, inevitably friction occurs and people turn to us and expect us to resolve that. Yeah. So, for example, last year we had 1.2 million volunteer collections take place. And so things like bank holiday weekends when shop opening and closing times are different and making sure that we sort of update all of that at scale and make sure that everyone knows where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be. That's just one sort of small example of a bit of an operational headache that we have to deal with.
Wow, that's a lot of, this is a logistics business, right?
It is,
we see your background because I made that you came out with this idea, you started it, right? How did you start this business? How you came out with this idea? And then did you realize that it was going to be so operational, complicated, and all the logistics?
Yeah. So I grew up on a farm in the northeast of the UK. And through my upbringing, I had it really kind of drummed into me that food is valuable, food is precious. It should absolutely never be wasted or thrown away. I then went on to pursue what could be described as a pretty classic corporate career. So I worked in media, retail, financial services, always in a digital general management role. And then it was just over 10 years ago, I was relocating back from living outside of the UK, coming home to the UK. And on moving day, the removal men told me I had to throw away all of our uneaten food. And obviously the farmer's daughter and me refused to do that. So instead I set out onto the streets with my newborn baby, my toddler, hoping to find someone to give the food to. I sadly failed miserably. I went back to my apartment, and when the removal men weren't looking, I smuggled the non-perishable foods into the bottom of my packing boxes. And that was when I thought that this was just crazy, the lengths I was going to avoid putting perfectly good food in the bin. I'd worked in the digital space for a decade. I knew there was an app for everything, and I couldn't believe there wasn't a simple app where I could share my spare food with my neighbours. The next thing that I did was to really kind of research the problem of food waste to understand how big that problem was or wasn't. And what my co-founder, Sasha, and I discovered absolutely blew our brains. So we learned that globally, a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away, which is worth over $1 trillion. alongside that, we have 800 million people who go to bed hungry each night. And even in a country like the UK, we have kind of roughly 10 million people living in food poverty. So we've got kind of widespread waste, we've got widespread hunger, and then the environmental impact of food waste is absolutely mind-blowing. So if it were to be a country, food waste would be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And the reason for that is because a landmass larger than China is used every year to grow food that's never eaten. And globally, food waste is responsible for 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than the whole entire fashion industry, and it's 5 times the aviation industry. And then in a country like the UK, over half of all food waste takes place in the home. And that was actually really exciting for Sasha and I to discover, because we thought, wow, that means that although each and every one of us, we're sort of over half this problem, if we flip it on its head, that means we can be over half the solution. And given my digital background, both of us had at that point in time, between us, almost 40 years of corporate experience. We were really excited to harness the power of mobile technology to solve this problem through building the Olio app. But we certainly did not anticipate that it would be such a sort of operationally complex business. We had fantasies that all we needed to do was launch this simple app that connected people with their neighbours so they could give away rather than throw away their spare food. And then it would just take off and grow like a rocket, and it would be all hugely digital and efficient. But what we discovered in practice was that our early adopters hated food waste. Therefore, they didn't generate any. Therefore, they had nothing to give away on the app. And the local cafes and bakeries that we had hoped would work with Olio to put their spare food at the end of the day on the app to bring extra customers into the store, cross-sell, upsell, etc. That didn't happen because they were too busy running their day-to-day businesses. So we're a food sharing app with no food, which was a pretty existential challenge. And so we solved that by saying, why don't we take the people who have lots of time and no surplus food and match them with the businesses that have no time and lots of surplus food. And that is what is today our Food Waste Heroes program. And that is what really sort of kickstarts that flywheel of hyperlocal sharing in any community. So, for example, it was back sort of during COVID times, we rolled out with Tesco. And Tesco have 2,700 stores. And so in the period of a couple of months, we had sort of rolled out across that store portfolio and therefore kickstarted hyperlocal sharing via the Olio app in 2,700 communities across the country. And that's also how we generate revenues for Olio. So the businesses pay us to take away their surplus food and make sure it's eaten rather than wasted. And that's about kind of 90% of our revenues today.
I imagine that also that helps the businesses to be compliant or try to be more compliant with the ESG and all these climate, regulations. It makes the business more sustainable as well if they partner with Olio.
Yes, it definitely makes the business more sustainable. Sadly, there is really very little regulation in this space. So there's not much there's nothing stopping businesses from throwing away perfectly good food. So that's something we would desperately love to see, is some regulation to come into this space. But certainly the more progressive businesses recognize that this is not a sustainable state of affairs, throwing away food in the way that they do. And also their employees do not like being paid to throw away food every single day. And customers, in particular during cost of living crisis, get really quite angry when they see all the food waste taking place at a retail store level. And so that's a big part of why businesses want to work with Olio in response to customer demand, employee demand, and then also we give them back their impact report so they get both their environmental and social impact. And we share with them lots of user testimonials and do lots of co-marketing. So it creates a really fantastic motivational feeling in the businesses that work with us, as well as, of course, saving costs on the waste contractors. They're no longer having to pay for that food to be taken off to waste streams.
Now that I was thinking about the logistics, because my background back in the days, not now, was in logistics. And so I know how complicated it is to do all of this. I can imagine. So in how many, because you partner with, or you have clients, like the big supermarket chains in the UK, right? Like Sainsbury, Tesco, Iceland, I imagine Pret, in terms of coffee shops. How many local points did you have to address every single day?
So Yeah, we've got about 8,500 locations that we redistribute surplus food from, and
Wow.
continuing to grow that pretty rapidly.
That's a massive. And I imagine that also doing, like the coordination with the volunteers is also very complicated because you have to have specific windows, people have to be available. I imagine that some of them have last minute cancellations.
Correct.
So I imagine that you have a big team coordinating the last minute, issues, I would say, to collect the food.
Yeah,
How do you manage?
We've tried to build technology to do that as much as possible. So any volunteer, when they claim they have to do their training first. That's all online training. They then have to pass the test at the end of it. Then they can claim their collection slot, and they can either skip a collection or they can pause their collections. So they have the capability to manage their volunteering experience around sort of their day-to-day life. And what we do is we put the volunteers on an in-app group chat. So the volunteers who are all supporting that same location can see one another's volunteering activity. And so that's really helpful to make sure that everyone is doing what they're supposed to do when they say they will. And really importantly, to make sure that they're listing the food promptly, accurately, following all of the rules that we have. So yes, there is definitely a lot of combination of kind of humans, technology, and increasingly we're really leaning into AI to help make sure that volunteers are only listing the food that they're supposed to list and that they're listing it in the correct way. And so that has been incredibly helpful in terms of improving our efficiency of operations.
And today, well, AI is everywhere, so it's possible not to ask something about AI. Where are you using AI today? Because I don't know if you have to optimize the routes for there is something in the background with the number of days that the food is, I don't know, it's it's going to expire. How are you using AI to help you to optimize the business?
So we use AI in a number of ways. The first way is in the actual sort of product itself. So we have a little tool called AIify, very unimaginatively named, but you can use it when you're adding listings to the app, which basically means you just need to take a photo of your item and then the app will sort of pre-populate the rest of the information. So that makes the listing process really streamlined and really fast. Then we're using AI and other tools to check that listing meets all of the requirements and doesn't break any of our rules. And then we have had a full-time AI sort of operations manager in the business for, I think, almost 2 years now, who has just been sort of constantly roving around the business and just using AI to automate as much of the sort of sticking plaster activities that take place behind the scenes. So that's been a really, really valuable investment. And then from an engineering perspective, we have had a significant unlock in Q1 of this year. Prior to this year, the engineering team were using Windsurf and Cursor and stuff like that. And that was helpful, but it wasn't game changing because we had almost a decade's worth of legacy code and a really quite complex system. However, the sort of step change that took place in the models in Q1 of this year means that we have more than doubled the productivity per engineering head in Q1 of this year versus Q4 of last year. Claude Code has really been the significant unlock there. And the rest of the organization has now sort of moved on to Claude. And so we're using sort of Claude Co-work, all of the Claude skills, and finding that incredibly powerful because what it does for us is it enables us to operate more efficiently, accelerate our growth, and just have more impact, which at the end of the day, we're really a very impact-focused business, and AI is a really powerful tool to accelerate our impact.
It's so advanced now. Claude is honestly to save my life, to be honest. I do so much with Claude. Back in the days, I was director of operations of a public transport company. It's a bus operator. 20,000 daily bus departures just in Santiago in Chile, 8,000 drivers, crazy operation. And I don't know how I did everything that I had to do without AI. Honestly, I don't know how I put all the information in my head, coordinating all the meetings. It was was I don't know how we did it, but yeah, AI now is very, very important, and it helps a lot to increase productivity. The last 2 weeks ago, I was talking with Paul Adams, the CPO of Intercom. It's like a very like
We're
important
rolling
company.
out Intercom's Fin tool, which is their AI tool.
Yeah, he's also working on Fin, and Intercom's a 300 million revenue, very successful company, and they ask everyone in the company to use cloud. Everyone.
Yeah.
It's part of the culture now. It's everyone everyone. So they did very big changes. They had to let go some people as well. But the culture, because everything is from culture, right? People, and then the implementation. So the one thing that they did, they mentioned that they don't want to increase productivity to reduce the number of employees. It's actually keep the same number of employees and increase productivity, reduce costs, and increase revenue. So that's what they did, and with that they removed all the barriers, or like the fear that the employees had with cloud, with the implementation of this strategy. Well, coming back to your business, I was saying that because as a good insight that I got so far in the last weeks to unlock the growth, because I imagine that I don't know how many millions is your revenue. I don't know if you can disclose that here, but I can imagine that you raise as well to be able to grow. Once you nail it, you understood how to run it, and yes, you needed more capital to grow the business. How much did you raise, or around? I don't know if you can mention it. How was that part of the journey? Because that's where you started growing and growing the team, building the structure, trying to make it efficient, implementing culture, having a specific, like a type of personalities and profiles in your business, because I think it's very human for your organization and what you do. So it's not easy to grow it when you have to pick up the right people for your business. How do you do all of this in terms of fundraising, capital, culture, people?
So we've raised roughly $50 million worth of financing, and we did that, the majority of that in the first sort of 6 years of the business's life. And we had investors who recognized that we're building a marketplace business, and it's really crucial with marketplaces that you kind of prove out the model and you focus on getting to scale and optimize for engagement before monetization. So that was why we had to fundraise to go on that journey. So we did our last raise in August of 2021, which was sort of right at the height of the market. And thankfully we did not spend it all. So, so we're in sort of good shape from that perspective. And, I would say that we sort of rode a wave, and we had a really rapid scaling period directly after we raised that Series B, where we brought in a full sort of C-suite that we'd never had before. So a CPO and a CTO and a CMO, all those roles that we had perhaps wanted for a while, but not been able to afford. And that was a really fascinating process to go through. So bringing in those people from external organizations had some real positives in that they then recruited really high quality people underneath them into their teams. They implemented new systems for us. So, kind of new CRM, new database and analytics capabilities. And then they also brought in new processes. But one of the downsides was that our velocity and our pace of delivery really, really dramatically slowed down. So actually our burn rate increased much more quickly than we were able to grow our revenues. So we then sadly had to kind of restructure the organization after we'd sort of been through that step change. So at its height, Olio was just over 100 employees. Today, we're down at 40. And just our pace of delivery today is many multipliers higher than when we were a much bigger organization. So we kind of feel like we're in a really great kind of sweet spot right now. In terms of the company culture, we have focused on building that as much as we've focused on building the product, because having a really strong culture is an essential prerequisite for having a high-performing team. And how we've done that is through recruiting people who are not just mission-aligned, but mission-obsessed. And that is definitely a much higher bar. So everyone who joins Olio has to be mission obsessed. And then we have just 4 company values, which are inclusive, resourceful, caring, and ambitious. And every single person who joins the company has to do a presentation as part of their recruitment process. And they have to demonstrate either from their professional lives or their personal lives how they really embody each of those 4 values. And when you have people who are mission obsessed, who sort of cut them and they bleed the same values, I think that really kind of sets you up for success to have a really strong company culture. And I should say that we are a remote first business. So we've never had an office, and we've managed to build this incredibly strong company culture despite that. And a lot of people sort of worry that if you don't have an office, it's not possible to build a culture. Our experience is absolutely the opposite. So twice a year, we do employee satisfaction surveys, and across pretty much every metric, the sort of average score is 8.5 plus. So we really have been able to demonstrate that you can build really strong culture where you can attract and retain really high quality talent without having a physical location. But we do bring our team together a couple of times a year. So in the spring, we have sort of functional offsite. In the summer, we have a summer party. In the fall, we have our annual retreat, which is the real sort of flagship event. No pretense of doing any work. It's just really bonding and connecting. And then at Christmas, we have a Christmas party.
So you have a few parties, I would say.
Oh, yes, we do. Yes, we do. So we lean into the sort of in real life bit for what in real life does uniquely well, which is the socializing, the bonding, the trust building. And we've found that sort of all of our work can be far more efficiently and effectively done remotely.
Yeah. No, that's a very good way after COVID. Like everyone want to connect again with people. I see that also in sales. Mm-hmm. Now you're doing, all these outreach campaigns or very digital, campaigns. It doesn't work anymore. You have to go to events, conferences, mm-hmm. or like referrals. It has to be super like a face-to-face or more like a human connection, right? Than, being. So I like what you've been doing. Well, congratulations. It's very exciting. I imagine that you have still a long way because you have a lot of
very long way still to go. Yes.
International expansion. From the board governance, do you have a board? I imagine, do you have investors on your board? Do you have a share? How do you manage the?
So we were under quite a lot of pressure from a number of prospective investors to form a board right away. So when we're doing our sort of seed stage raises, but we knew that forming a board at that stage was not going to be productive. In fact, we felt it would be counterproductive because the pace at which we needed to move to just be continually testing, iterating and learning was so fast that having sort of a board that would then remind us about, what we've been saying sort of a quarter ago, and like the world will change 10 times in a quarter when you're in the really early stage. So I'm very glad that we did not resisted that pressure. We did not form a board. However, once we closed our Series A, we then knew that that was the right time to form a board, and we did. It meets 4 times a year, which is absolutely kind of the right cadence for us because there is quite an overhead to preparing for board meetings, and quarterly is absolutely right. Yeah, right cadence for us. And we structured it so that we have 2 co-founders on the board, 2 investor directors, and we have 1 non-executive director. And that has worked really well for us. In our later rounds, we have invited a number of our investors to join the board as board observers when they had a very unique skill set or perspective to bring to the table. And we really wanted them to have that seat at the table. And that has also worked well for us. I've spoken to a number of founders who have sometimes cautioned against having board observers. And I can see that that can be risky, sort of all other things being equal. I'd probably prefer not to have board observers. But in our specific instance, it really did make sense to have board observers, and they've been incredibly helpful to the business.
Do you have a chair?
We do not. No. And to date, we haven't needed to formalize that. So essentially, self and Sasha kind of run the meeting. We have a document, a very brief document, which is called the sort of, we refer to it as the rules of the road of the board. And we explain kind of what we want to get out of the board and what will enable us to perform at our best. One of the most important things we also say there is that we will kind of ruthlessly park suggestions or ideas or stuff that might be a distraction to the business. And once we've got sort of agreement on the rules of the road, Sasha and I now sort of run the meetings, and it's very much kind of sleeves rolled up, very just productive, constructive conversations. I am sure as we continue our scaling journey and as we perhaps look to raise again or start to think about exits, then absolutely having a chair will be very valuable. But sort of right now, we haven't felt the need for that role.
Yeah. Why? Once you scale, you need other capabilities and expertise. For sure, you're gonna bring probably more other non-executive directors that they are very helpful. Well, depending on the area, right? And for how long have you been running the board? Because in the end, it feels that you're running the board, right?
Since 2018.
It's been 8 years then. So like it's quite like a long journey. I always talk about the board because I like to hear, or we like to hear how you manage that. Because when you are building a startup and you move from seed to CSA, it's generally, as you mentioned, you create the board. And people don't know it because, again, when you have pre-seed and you raise for first time, as you mentioned, the investors, everyone push you to have a board. When in reality, you don't need it. That's what I learned so far with my limited experience, working on the startup world. But I have heard that very, very often, basically from other founders at a more mature stage. Olio has 100,000 food waste heroes, right? You mentioned that you mentioned that they help you with all the coordination. You give them incentives, right? How do you manage? Do you have a clear we can say like a procedure to let go of volunteers when they don't fit their profile?
Yes, we do. So underpinning our volunteering program is our food safety management system, and that sets out very clear rules as to how the volunteers are supposed to collect, store, and then redistribute the food. And so if any volunteers are not following those rules correctly, or perhaps if any volunteers are being rude or offensive or just not constructive members of the community, we learned pretty early on that it is important that you ask volunteers to step down. And in the early days, I can remember thinking, gosh, can you fire a volunteer? That seems like a very strange concept. But we pretty quickly learned that it is crucial that you are able to move on volunteers that aren't following the rules and aren't being constructive, because otherwise it can very, very quickly create a lot of discord and sort of undermine the program. So yeah, we do suspend. We have a pretty complex system of warnings, suspensions, and then bans.
That's good to know. So people have to be aligned with the policy. This is the last question about the other more important, like very important stakeholder, right? Which is like the retailers who help you to run, the business as well, because in the end they are partners. From their perspective, what is most important for them? I know that's going to depend on each business, but in general, it's like waste reduction, ESG data, community impact, cost savings, or brand trust. Which are like the key aspects for them to partner with you?
I mean, you answered it yourself. It varies from every business. So for some businesses, one or two of those are more important than others. For some of them, it's all of them. But what I would say is that a major motivator for businesses is having a positive impact in the communities in which they operate. So initially, when we first started talking to retailers, for example, we would lead with the environmental messaging and what a powerful environmental initiative it is to redistribute your surplus food. But we've found that we've got far more traction when we talk about the positive community impact that you can have, in particular during a cost of living crisis. So if I had to pick one sort of motivator, I would say that it is that.
And do you have any marketing plan with them where they promote
yes,
Olio?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they do we do a lot of co-marketing. They're very proud of the work that we have done together. So Tesco, for example, I remember when we hit the 5 million meals milestone redistributed through our partnership, they created some fantastic video assets and pushed that out through all of their sort of social media channels and other touch points. Lots of our clients will do marketing in store, or perhaps say if it's an office canteen, in the canteen, promoting our work together.
Amazing. Tessa, would you like to say which is like the main lesson learned in all this journey, being 9 years, creating this beautiful, value proposition? Which is the most important lesson that you learned so far?
Well, obviously learned hundreds, if not thousands of lessons. Perhaps the most important one has just been the importance of constantly testing, measuring and learning. So not waiting, building behind closed doors, trying to perfect something and then doing a big launch, actually just getting stuff out when it isn't particularly pretty and just getting real world data as fast as possible, and then not being afraid to iterate or pivot in response to that data. I think the second thing I have learned is that there's no such thing as a silver bullet. So in the early days, it was very easy to think that the next product release, the next fundraising round, the next major hire would result in that sort of hockey stick growth inflection point. And actually, I've learned that it's just about just consistency, showing up, doing the reps, and just layering on lots of test, measure, learn. That is what drives the growth.
Thank you so much for your time, for joining. And yeah, it was a very good experience. It was very nice to talk to you as well. Would you like to say something to close the chapter?
Well, I guess probably my main message to anyone who's on an entrepreneurial journey is just to sort of keep fighting the good fight. And if when you're listening right now, you're going through a challenging time, just know that around the corner there will be some positive news and some positive momentum. In my experience, that has always been the case. So often you just got to kind of hang in there.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's wait probably a few next year or 2 years more. I will contact you again, Tessa. I want to know where you are, where we can explain all the big achievements that you reached so far. Thank you so much again. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Cheers. Bye-bye.